Hello everyone, and happy N7 Day. For those of you who don't know, November 7th is N7 Day because it is a reference to the brilliant Mass Effect trilogy. So this is one of my favorite video game series of all time. It is a science fiction, third-person, sort of hybrid shooter role-playing game. And it's one that I've only gotten into relatively recently, I'd say around maybe 2015-ish or so. But I immediately fell in love with it. I bought this lovely trilogy box set at a friend's recommendation, and it was totally everything I want from science fiction because I just love this universe that is created in this game. It's a really great blend of many classic science fiction elements that all come together to create this really unique and interesting experience. So I figured it would be good to talk about one of my favorite series. And also it has now been 10 years since the release of the original. So if you haven't played it yet, then get on that, because I'm going to be spoiling it, and it's really great. Initially, the original was only released on Xbox 360 and PC, but with the release of this trilogy collection, you can also get it for the PlayStation, which is my console of choice, because I'm a console peasant, not part of the PC master race, unfortunately. So I'm just going to go through and talk about each one while showing off this lovely collection. The thing I really like about this is that if you get it, there's a lot of the DLCs, specifically for the second game, that you get already on the disc, and it comes with a code for the multiplayer for the third one, and a downloadable code for some other DLCs for the second one. And unfortunately, you'll still have to buy all the other ones for 2 and for 3, but that's okay. So, sort of this nice little box picture here of the protagonist that you play of the series, which is Commander Shepard. So Commander Shepard is a N7, which is the Earth Human Alliance Navy forces. And then it just sort of folds out to this nice little bit with all the games. So yeah, it's a pretty nice little set. It's very cheap too. I think it's only around like $20 to $30 for 3 really great games and a bunch of extra content. So the story of Mass Effect is that as Commander Shepard, you are on the process of becoming a Spectre, which is sort of along the lines of maybe like a Jedi Knight. Basically, the many different alien species in the galaxy, they have this council together, and the Spectres are sort of the agents of the Galactic Council, and they are above the law, above authority. And at the start of the first game, the 3 alien species represented on the council are the Turians, Asari, and Solarians, and humanity wants to eventually get its own seat on the council. So you, Commander Shepard, become the first human Spectre. And in the first game, your job is to track down a rogue Spectre, a Turian named Saren, who is up to a very evil scheme to help with the rise of this ancient race of sort of synthetic organic hybrids called Reapers. They are these giant machine-like monsters that come to the galaxy every 5,000 years, I believe it is, to systematically wipe out almost all evolved intelligent life in the galaxy, leaving only the lesser species to remain, and that is what is going to soon occur. So your job over the course of the trilogy is to stop that from happening. So for me, what I really love about the game is the story to it. There's sort of a balance of three elements in the game, and that is the story, the combat, and the exploration. And there's been many very great video analyses, whatever, on the subject. And for me, I really have always loved the story in Mass Effect. I felt it's been very consistently good throughout the whole thing. And the combat is something that I think got better with each game. The first game, it definitely seemed to be a little more designed with the PC in mind. The way that the different powers you have, sort of, you would map them to many different, keyboard buttons, whereas it would be more difficult to do that on a console because you only have so many buttons that you can map powers to. And definitely some of the power-ups and the animations to it was a little clunky for its time in 2007, but it was something that improved. So even though the first game might not necessarily be perfectly polished, it definitely sets a good standard for better things to come. The other interesting thing I find about this is that I would clearly say that Mass Effect 2 is my favorite of the series, but none of the games are perfect, and every one has both the worst and best element of the series. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think the first game had the best mechanic of role-playing. It seemed like even though you would get the same ending every time, there were many branching paths onto how you would get there. You had many different dialogue options and ways to approach a conversation. And it seemed like there were a lot more sort of explorative side quests and elements out there. And this meant that it felt like you really had control over who your Commander Shepard was. And then going down the line of the games, I feel that this was sort of taken away. So by the time you get to the third one, you only get 2 dialogue options per choice, rather than like 3 or 4. And there's a lot of auto dialogue. That's the thing. In Mass Effect 1, there was almost no auto dialogue. You got to choose what you wanted to say for nearly every line. But in Mass Effect 3, you'll have like an entire stretch of a conversation, and you only get to say like one choice throughout that. And it's a little alienating. I really didn't like that in Mass Effect 3, because there were so many times where like I wanted to make a choice in a conversation, but the game automatically makes it for you. One example I can think of is when Edie, your ship's AI, who eventually gets a body of her own, she asks like about relationships and stuff. And at the time, I was romancing Garrus with a female Shepard, and I thought, oh, well, I have many interesting things I can talk about. But your character automatically says, oh, I'm not a people person. So, it's moments like that where I think the first game was definitely the best. But it's also the weakest because, again, the combat is definitely very sort of clunky to it and can be very unintuitive, the way it works. So by the time you get to the third one, I feel that everything was really polished. You had like a dodge and a roll option. The cover mechanic seemed to work the best at that time. And everything was really streamlined from the way the guns and the weapons worked. But at the same time, it did feel like it was sort of dialing down on the roleplay aspect to it. One thing that makes the first game kind of tough is that, like most RPG games, you have a class that you play as. But once you've picked this class, you can't change it to the rest of the game, and it strictly limits what weapons and powers you have available. So if you don't pick the soldier class, then you don't get assault weapons training, right? If you pick the infiltrator class, you have sniper rifle training. And so this means that if you try to use anything that's an assault rifle, you won't be able to actually aim down the sights with the weapon. And your aim will be completely off, and you don't get any skill points that would allow you to give you more damage or accuracy with the assault weapons. So it makes it very tough in that way, because you have to think what play style you're going to want to do right off the bat, and you can't ever change on the fly. And this was something that eventually was slowly phased out in favor of what Mass Effect Andromeda went with, where you could literally change your class and your powers on the fly to whatever you needed. But we'll get more into talking about that game later. So, overall, while the first one may not necessarily be the most fun game experience, it's definitely worth it for the universe and the story of just really getting into this. I feel that we've never really gotten like a totally perfect Star Wars or Star Trek exploration type grand epic scale type game. Maybe Knights of the Old Republic, but I actually haven't played it yet. I should really change that. So, for me, this is like the substitute for that, much in the same way that until I got Alien Isolation, Dead Space was my favorite Alien game, because it just did what I wanted, but with like a different universe and set of characters. So, the first game's a really, overall great story, just maybe a little clunky in certain areas, but that's okay, because then we got Mass Effect 2. And really, it's interesting because on paper, when I first started playing the game, and just like the idea of it seemed like something that I would have absolutely hated, because to start off, you lose all of your squad. The game establishes that they're all there throughout the universe and you get to meet them, but it only is until later that you get to bring a few of them along, and even then you don't get to bring your entire team with you, just Garrus and Tali, right? You have to, you're forced to take all these new people with you. So at first I thought, well, I really liked my team that I had. It was a nice tight team. They all had very different characteristics to them, and you had to make a really big choice about which of your human squad mates you wanted to save. At Vermeer, that was a really great moment. And now you're telling me after all that I have to meet new people? Like, I don't want to do that. I like my tight circle of friends. But surprisingly, all the new characters are really great, and they have a lot of backstory to them. Though, if you did want to get a little critical, you could say that perhaps they all seem to suffer from daddy issues. There's this mechanic in the game called the loyalty system, and basically this means you have to complete a special mission for each squad mate so that they can get extra powers unlocked and have a more likelihood of surviving the final mission. Well, I do like this mechanic because it rewards players who are more invested in helping their team, and it punishes those who just simply want to speed through the game and not use the time in between the shooting missions to, learn the story. But every mission does seem to be that everyone has some kind of issue to do with their parents. There's this one funny picture I remember seeing. It was the meme of the "why you know," and with every character relative to like their son or their mother or their father or something to do with that. But it's still it's fun, and like the moments to them, there's so many good bits. I really liked Garrus's loyalty mission, and Jack's loyalty mission. Even my least favorite character, which is Jacob, I still really enjoyed his loyalty mission. It had some sort of fun mechanics to it. So the other thing is, the way the combat is sort of revamped. Like, weapons actually have ammo now, and there is an in-universe explanation, and it doesn't make any sense, but that's okay. I'm just going with game designer changes the way it works. It's kind of like how in Resistance, if you remember that one, Fall of Man and Resistance 2, the second one takes place like hours after the end of the first one, and yet all of a sudden, like, the guns look completely different and everything looks different because it's a new game, so they changed up design, so it makes sense from that perspective, but not in an in-universe. It seems weird that half an hour would transpire between one game and a second game, and then all of a sudden all of these guns and technology would completely change, but I just sort of accept it for what it is. But surprisingly, the way that works is actually pretty well. And then the galaxy map was revamped a bit, the way you travel around between planets, so you're actually in control of the ship. And it's a nice little feature that I think adds a little depth to the overall experience rather than just simply pointing and clicking. It was a change that they took away when they did Mass Effect Andromeda, and I was kind of disappointed by that. I know a lot of people like to criticize that game for the overly long flying animations, but they patched in a skip feature, and I do like the sort of scenic exploration. I like it when a game can really give a sense of like journey and space, because space is deep and vast. But still, perhaps if there had been the sort of flying around with your ship, that could have been a little better. So, despite the sort of changes that would, seem to make me dislike Mass Effect 2, they actually seem to work out for the most part pretty well. Though, one thing I can say where this is the worst game in terms of a certain aspect is the morality system. So you are making choices throughout these games, and in the original trilogy there's a Paragon and Renegade scale, and it's not necessarily good and evil, which I like. Like, no matter what, you still are a hero trying to save the galaxy, but it more depends on whether or not you're always trying to do the right thing or getting the job done regardless of the costs, right? A really good sort of comparison that Yahtzee made in his Zero Punctuation review was whether or not you're, Captain Picard or Dirty Harry, right? A very basic decision is that, a Paragon, when faced with sort of the confrontation of having someone hostage by an enemy, they would, listen to the demands and try to do whatever it takes to make sure the hostage lives. But the Renegade decision would be to stop the bad guy, regardless of whether or not the hostage dies. So, what I liked in the first game was that you had separate meters for Paragon and Renegade. Like, making decisions wouldn't necessarily cancel the other out, but that is sort of the way it works in Mass Effect 2. There is a bit of a scale in terms of that. Making more of one will sort of decrease the impact of the other. So it does mean that you are sort of forced to particularly play one playstyle rather than picking the option that you want. But in practice, though, I never really encountered it in that bad of a way. Like, I did overall play Renegade, but there were times where, even if it was a very big Renegade decision, I didn't do it because it's not what I would have wanted to do. A few examples would be, like, during Samara's loyalty mission, whether or not you side with her or Morinth, and it's a major Renegade decision to side with Morinth, but that's not what I wanted to do, so I picked the Paragon option. But even then, the reason you need more points is because there will be certain moments where you need a high amount of points to get the right dialogue option to have it unlocked for you to choose. And if you don't have enough points, if you haven't been going one or the other, then you won't be able to pick those options, potentially leading you to a bad scenario. But I never had this problem. Even with picking a lot of Paragon decisions, I still was okay with passing all of the important checks on whether or not I had enough of one or the other. So it didn't really end up being that big of an issue, but I liked what they did with it in 3 better, where you did have a meter that could be a certain balance of Paragon and Renegade, but certain actions would give you reputation, which simply increases your overall meter regardless of which side you've chosen. So rather than automatically confining one choice to either being Paragon or Renegade, simply making something happen gets you noticed and builds up your reputation. So I think Mass Effect 3, despite having the least amount of dialogue options and the most auto dialogue, had the Paragon Renegade system the best, in my mind. So, for me though, what really makes Mass Effect 2 the best one is the way everything flawlessly builds up around a primary goal and confrontation. Like, Mass Effect 3 had many different diversions throughout its story, even though the primary goal of it is that at the end you were going to go to Earth to have the final battle against the Reapers. But there's a lot of many different aspects to it. It's a very long game, and it kind of feels that at certain points you could sort of get sidetracked by other things. Whereas Mass Effect 2, regardless of what mission you were doing, even if you were doing some of the DLC stuff like Arrival or Lair of the Shadow Broker, it always seemed to be that the presence of the suicide mission was there. So I really liked that, because it felt like everything flawlessly built up to this really great climax. And there's actual consequences during this final mission. You have to choose which squad mate you send to do certain things, and depending on how you played the entire game, even Commander Shepard could die. You could make it through without killing a single one of your teammates. You could lose some, you could lose almost all, or again, your game could just sort of end right there if your Shepard dies. So that made it really intense. I remember that while I was playing the game, I did sort of cheat and look up a few little aspects, but I made a rule not to look up anything about the suicide mission, just what even happened. And it was a really scary moment for me, because I didn't know if I was making the right decisions or not. So it's just such a great moment in gaming, the way that is, and it's up there with the ending of Dead Space 2 for me in terms of intensity. I will compare these a lot because they are both trilogies by developers that are published by EA. They all came out 1 year relative to each other. The first Mass Effect was 2007, the first Dead Space was 2008. They do follow that sort of trilogy pattern where I like the second one the best because of how it really ramped up the intensity. And like the third one, there's a lot of extra things this sort of forced multiplayer put in, and while it may be very weak in a story element, surprisingly it might have the most replayability. So that brings us to Mass Effect 3. And yeah, let's talk about the ending, right? That's what everyone talks about, right? The ending to Mass Effect 3. So it's controversial because it really boils down 3 games worth of stories and decisions into a simple, 3 choice option between which color filter you want over the ending. So I will give BioWare credit though. The extended cut did help improve the ending and give more resolution depending on which outcome you picked. So I think it did improve it in that way. But my only issue with it is like the way the choice is set up. It's your option with using the Crucible is to either destroy the Reapers, take control of the Reapers, or fuse all synthetic and organic life into a hybrid like the Reapers. And then the extended cut adds the extra option of you just simply refusing to do anything, which just leads to humanity all getting killed. So, I understand what BioWare was going for with the ending. The way that this system works is that basically organics will create synthetics, AI, like the Geth, and since the synthetics know who their creator is, they will always rebel against them because they know that they have more power. It's a very common theme that we've seen across many different science fiction universes and franchises, so that makes sense. So, there was a species called the Leviathan, at least that's the main one we talked to in one of the DLCs, and this was this group of species that created super artificial intelligences, like the Star Child, and his purpose was to, find a solution to this synthetic uprising, and so its solution was to basically cleanse the galaxy of all higher intelligent forms of life every 5,000 years or so, so that there could never be a total synthetic uprising. And the idea being that after these species were wiped out, that new ones would eventually rise up and flourish, right? And there was going to be an extra plot about the point of dark energy and element zero and its effect in slowly destroying the fabric of space and time, but that didn't get incorporated. So I understand the idea and the purpose behind this, but for me, I feel that there's a lot of flawed thinking in this Star Child. It can't see beyond its programming, and it can't see the flaw in the way it thinks, because it's a program and it can't understand more than what it knows. So I would have had everything up until that point that was okay with me. I understand that, but if there could have been some kind of big type of conversation where it became this battle of ideologies and debate trying to convince the Star Child that what it thought was wrong, I think that would have been a lot more engaging of an ending. Because if you don't play the Star Child's game, it's just, well, okay, humanity dies. There's no way to have this kind of confrontation and standoff. He just simply explains, this is the way it is now, do as I say, or else you will die. Again, the extended cut did give you an option to tell him to fuck off, but it's completely pointless. You get the satisfaction of doing it, but it's useless, it achieves nothing. So, I would have liked it if, perhaps, there was some way to argue and actually potentially convince this program of finding some other type of solution, instead of just destroying the Reapers, which is the only one that makes logical sense, forcing assimilation upon everyone, or attempting to take control of the Reapers, something that you just slammed the elusive man for trying to do 5 minutes ago. So, yes, it is a weak ending. From an ideological standpoint, it does not make sense. From a conversational, gameplay-wise element, it does not make sense. But there is so much good elsewhere in the game that I still think it is worth it. There are some very heavy, dramatic moments and major choices you have to make about uniting all the species. And I love the way that it's all been flawlessly built up for 3 games. the idea of Krogan and Solarian relations and Quarry and Geth relations, all of this fully comes to a head here in this game. And it's something that has been present throughout the games, and I think that's what makes it so worthwhile to see everything in terms of those decisions pay off. Right? Like, you can have wildly different outcomes for the Krogan Solarian situation and the Quarry and Geth situation, and it depends on what you've done throughout the other games. So that is really, for me, where this game shines. And it's just a shame that the ending didn't take that into account. I could rant for a lot more about that ending and stuff, but I don't want to take too much time just to talk about negativity. You know, there are many good elements. I really love a lot of the DLCs to the game, specifically the Citadel DLC, because it just feels that after 3 games of like super serious, important missions, and you know, slight little moments of comedy in there, like calibrations, we finally just get to see everything go total crazy, over the top fan fiction. And it works because you've spent so much time in a serious universe. You know, so it's okay to just have, you know, random silliness and zaniness and hilarious over the topness. It's the writers poking fun at constant in-jokes that have survived throughout the community over the years. So it's totally earned, and it's a really great send-off to the series. You know, the best way to play the game is to just play the game into the end, and then reload your save, and then go do the party. And then that's your real ending. But there is, unfortunately, one lesson that BioWare didn't learn from Mass Effect 3. And unfortunately, it really presented itself in a very bad way in Mass Effect Andromeda. This is a difficult game to talk about, so let's just see what we can do. So, Mass Effect Andromeda takes place initially between Mass Effect 1 and 2, I believe, or sort of around 2 and 3, like within that range, basically before the Reapers have invaded and everything, the galaxy's gone to hell. And the Andromeda Initiative is this organization, this group put together by this entrepreneur, Gian Garson, with the goal of establishing colonial life in the Andromeda Galaxy, the closest neighboring galaxy to us. So, you know, by the time you get there, the events of the original trilogy, those are long gone. Those have already passed. And, you know, it was definitely a storytelling mechanic so that they could avoid which ending the players chose. So, it's difficult to talk about this game because there is a lot that I think was actually done right, and some elements it actually has things that are better than any of the other 3 Mass Effect games. But the amount of mistakes that have been made and the way just the final experience turns out really, really harms my overall opinion of the game. And I think the most difficult thing for me to accept is that this might be the last Mass Effect game we ever get. This came out in March or so, I believe, and you know, over the next few months there were many patches by BioWare to, you know, fix some of the bugs or the details and stuff like that in the game and just overall improve it. And I did really like these changes that were being implemented. Granted, it would have been better if these had been in the game from the first place instead of patching it, but a fix is a fix regardless, and you didn't have to pay extra for it. But after the latest patch, sort of around the summer, I believe, BioWare announced that they aren't making any more patches for the game. There's going to be no story DLC, and any story-related things that weren't finished are going to be continued in books or comics or graphic novels. So, for me, that's a sign that there isn't going to be an Andromeda 2, and the story is essentially over in terms of the gaming experience. And that's really sad for me because I wanted to hold off judgment on Mass Effect Andromeda until perhaps there had been a full trilogy. It's the same reason that I don't think I really have a concise opinion of the new Star Wars movies, because The Force Awakens is part 1 of a trilogy, and The Last Jedi is going to be part 2, and then there's a third one which we don't know. And the issue with analyzing only one chapter of a trilogy is that it is set up so that things are carrying over throughout all three. You kind of have to look at the entire thing as one whole gigantic piece to, I think, properly analyze it. You can look at it, an individual part, and pick things apart at that for certain. But many elements, you do have to have the hindsight of the entire trilogy. To use Star Wars as an example, one thing that I know was a complaint from many people about The Force Awakens was that Captain Phasma has like 90 seconds of screen time and does nothing. So, many people thought that this was basically Boba Fett 2.0. Now, at the time of filming this, The Last Jedi hasn't come out yet, but in the trailer we see that she's back and she's having a big duel against Finn. Thus, we know that she's going to be in the movie. So, now it means that this critique of that she was only in the movie for like 90 seconds is it really valid anymore, because perhaps it is just establishing her for things to go on further throughout the trilogy. Another example of this, to use Mass Effect as an example, if you were to only look at the first Mass Effect game, the Krogan, Solarian, and Quarried Geth relations would just seem so simplified. You don't really know much of Krogan society. You haven't seen the Krogan homeworld yet. You haven't seen really the way the Solarian society operates. Your only knowledge of the Geth is that they're mindless killing robots. My initial comparison to them was to the Borg, but once I learned of the Reapers, they're probably closer to the Borg than the Geth are. And my initial assumption was just, well, the Quarians were this innocent race. But you get all this knowledge throughout the trilogy, and thus you become more conflicted as to what the actual right answer is. So, it's reasons like that I wanted to hold off judging Mass Effect Andromeda, because I could criticize certain elements of it, but again, perhaps those would sort of go on to be more further established in sequels. But it doesn't look like we're going to get them, unfortunately. So, let's get the bad out of the way first. The facial animations are not good. We can establish that. But that doesn't bother me that much. Like, there's some pretty hilarious bugs and glitches, but really that's sort of a feature of many BioWare games. I'm not really gonna let that. There's all of the funny meme videos out there and, making fun of all of that. That doesn't bother me. What bothers me is more the glitches, like how many side quests are like incompletable, the way that many side quests involve you driving around the map hoping for a random group of enemies to spawn in. They may or they may not. It's a random chance. There's a bug that I see so often where the subtitles appear for dialogue, and you can see the character's mouth moving, but the actual line for that audio doesn't occur until a good several seconds after the character's mouth has already done the animation and the subtitles have been up for a while. I don't like the dialogue and the way the characters interact, because I mentioned earlier that what makes the Citadel DLC so great is how it's been built up to this sort of zany, fun adventure, but everything has been relatively grounded. Whereas here, it just seems like they were trying to do the Citadel DLC right off the bat with characters that weren't established, and that really drags it down, because I just can't seem to be relating to any of these characters. There are great little character moments here and throughout, but those are spread apart throughout many instances that I just don't really like. Of your main squad, I don't like Liam that much. He has a few good moments. I don't like PB that much. A few good moments. I romanced Cora in my main playthrough, and she was actually alright. But, again, I would like to think that there'd be even more character development, but now that there's not another game, I sort of just have to go with that. And I liked that her arc was similar to relatable, similar to Miranda's, if you romanced her. So that was nice. For me, the best are definitely Drax and Vetra. He's just such a total old, awesome badass, and Vetra is just like totally committed to being prepared for everything. Like, Vetra is an example of a funny, entertaining character, but done in a more grounded way. She has her funny little lines and quips here and there, and especially if you romance her, she's very adorable and how awkward she is, much very like Garrus. But at the same time, like, she means business, she gets stuff done. And, I just feel that almost everyone else is very incompetent in that way. I don't like the way the role-playing element works to the game. You almost never really make choices. If you do, they're very far and few, and only a few of them actually have a big impact on the story. Again, it's something where I didn't want to judge it, because there's a lot of decisions you make throughout the original Mass Effect where they don't really impact that actual game. They become relevant much later. The Rachni Queen decision in Mass Effect 1 is a good example. And characters will reference that and talk about your decision throughout 1 and 2, but really the actual outcome of that decision does not become relevant until midway through Mass Effect 3. So, again, it's something I can't really judge Andromeda on, because we're not going to find out. Though, there are some good elements to the game, so we'll try to get some positivity in there. So, I really like the exploration to the game. I actually liked the Mako in Mass Effect 1. I liked the idea of it, and I wanted them to do it better, and they did. We got the Nomad. I like that you can drive around fast, and you can go across these very expanse, open, giant worlds. My favorite being Eladin, I believe it is. The sandy desert planet, not the rocky desert planet. Mainly because it's just like a total reference to Dune. A big sandy area with these giant sand dunes. And there's a giant worm running around out there. This remnant abyssal, as it's called. I just love every element to that. Very much reminded me of Shadow of the Colossus, one of my all-time favorite games. So I really liked that aspect to it, just like exploring this open area, not knowing what's out there, and then coming across a dune to find an enemy base on the other side. It's not perfectly done, but just the idea of it was such a step up from the exploration of Mass Effect 1. So I really liked that. I didn't think I was going to like the combat, because it seemed that it would be too easy, but I think everything's balanced enough so that the fact that you have access to every power if you've put the points into it doesn't make you that overpowered, because you can only have 3 at a time, and if you want to switch to others, then you have to wait for a cooldown. So you do have to actually be strategic about it, thankfully. So I liked that. There's a decent selection of good guns and customization. The system for customizing them is it's not intuitive at all. But once you've gone over the wiki a few times and figured it out, it works. So that's good. And then one of my favorite things is sort of to do with the ending. I don't like the story in the ending. I feel it's a very quick, forced conflict that comes out of nowhere and just seems very dumb. Like this whole idea that you leave the what is it called? Not the Codex, not the Conduit, not the Crucible, not the Citadel, the something C. No, the Nexus. Sorry, it doesn't start with a C. You leave the Nexus for 5 minutes to go off to activate the Meridian thing, and then it's like, hey, the Archon and the Remnant bad guys, they just showed up and took it. They took the human arc. Oh, okay. Don't we have a supercomputer in our brain that's on there that is in constant communication with us? Did he just forget to check back in or something? And then you can operate Remnant technology without his help somehow. It doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense to me, and I didn't really like that. But the one thing I did like is that they learned from Mass Effect 3 to incorporate your choices into the ending. And that is that if you've saved people or kept people alive throughout the game, like the NPCs, they'll actually be there with you at the end. And not just, oh, I'm going to talk to this person before I go off to the final battle, or you hear them on the radio. You're fighting with your squad, and that NPC shows up and starts fighting with you. And it actually made the ending a lot easier for me when I was fighting against a bunch of berserker Krogans, because I had all of these NPCs helping me fight. So that was an aspect that I think was done well. It's just a shame it could have been done in an ending and a story that deserved it. I like that you can keep playing after the ending, like you could in Mass Effect 2. That's always fun, because one thing that I didn't really like is that in Mass Effect 1 and 3 you're kind of forced to do every single little side mission if you want to do them before you do the ending. Whereas with Mass Effect 2 and Andromeda, you had a choice of doing that. Just the only problem is that there's no real point, because the story's not going to go anywhere. So overall, yes, the game is a disappointment. I probably won't be playing it as much as the other games. And yes, I really wish we could have gotten something much better in place of this. And I am kind of disappointed, because I did see some potential in elements of this game. I don't think it is that bad. This is not the worst game of all time. I would still give it, if I did scores, I would give it a positive score. But it is what it represents, and that is a failure to use the time and resources necessary to create something truly amazing. And the, failure to commit to going all the way with this idea, and the ultimate tragedy that this is probably the final nail in the Mass Effect coffin. So, yeah, it's kind of sad in that way. But we can't end on that note, so let's try to end on a more positive way, and I'll talk about specifically my favorite moments from the franchise. From Mass Effect 1, I love all the stuff with Conrad Werner. He is just so hilarious. He's this rabid super fan that you see throughout all the games as long as you talk to him, and just how like in love with you he is. It's really hilarious. I love that his saga sort of came fully over by the third game. It was just really great. I love the romance element to the game. Throughout each one, you can choose to sort of flirt casually with squad members, but you have to be committed to one. If you flirt with multiple ones, they'll get mad at you, and then eventually you can have a sex scene with them. But it leads to some really touching and emotional moments. Do I even have to say it though? But Garrus, he's obviously the best to romance. He's like your ultimate bro. He's got your back. He's so adorable and awkward. Like he's just great. Just everything about him is awesome. So just any of that, and of course the best "I'm busy" NPC dialogue of all time. Can't wait for a bit. I'm in the middle of some calibrations. It's classic. I love all of the Quarry and Geth conflict over the role of AI in society and the creator and everything with Tali and Legion. Legion, he's such a great character. I like how he's never trying really to be funny. There's a few lines here and there, such as Geth do not intentionally infiltrate. But for the most part, the humor comes from him playing everything sort of totally straight face. And just seeing the hilarity ensue from there. Shepard Commander. There's so many great moments throughout the DLC of Mass Effect 3, like when you go on a date with Garrus and turns out he's been dancing. He's so good, he actually managed to teach Shepard how to dance. And made her unlearn the Shepard Shuffle. Like, that's quite an achievement. So, that's all really great. Morden's such a great character, just his fast talking and everything, and when he starts singing, I love him so much. Thane, I think, was a character I really wish I could have seen more of. I feel like he doesn't have enough game time, even if you take him with you everywhere, and he has such a sad death scene. But I love when you get vengeance against Kai Lang. That guy's such a little bitch. He's such a little punk, just hiding behind his chopper and his guns, and he can barely fight. You kill him and you stab him. It's like, that was for Thane, you son of a bitch. That was such a satisfying moment. There's I'm gonna have to go play the entire trilogy again now, because it's just such a great franchise. It's a bit sad what it's come to, but you have to look back at the good moments that you once had and enjoy those while they lasted. There's probably a million other things I could say about this, and that I'm just not thinking of right now. But if somehow you watched this entire video and you didn't go and play the games already, then you should go do it. It's really great. It's one of the best science fiction third-person role-playing shooter games I've played in a very long time. And I'm going to keep playing them. But it still can never beat Dead Space for me, though. And that's all I have to say.